the Evaluation Couch with Maria Montenegro. In today's episode, I will be discussing positionality statements, and I will be sharing with you my positionality statement as it relates to this podcast. If you don't know what positionality statements are, don't worry. We'll also be discussing briefly what they are and explain a little bit of how evaluators use them. A positionality statement usually includes one's reflections on how their identities, worldviews, or opinions relate to the work that they are doing or to the people involved in their work. They are used as a way to acknowledge and be transparent about biases that evaluators might bring into their work. There are some groups that advocate for using positionality statements because they think that their use could help reduce social inequities and injustices. And I wanted to give a few examples of how that might happen just to make it a little bit clearer. I'm going to use fictional examples that are inspired in my actual experiences and my actual identities. So let's imagine that I'm working in an evaluation of a language training program for new immigrants. When reflecting on my identities and developing my positionality statement, I could recognize that my cultural background and my English proficiency may influence how I perceive the experiences of the participants of this program. So once I recognize this potential bias, one, I can be transparent about how my experiences can shape evaluation findings. And two, I can also try to find mitigation strategies to reduce them. So as one example, I might create a steering committee where there's diverse voices of immigration and include them throughout the process of the evaluation. Another example could be if I am working in an evaluation of a program in a settlement services organization. I would recognize that my middle-class upbringing may impact my understanding of the challenges that low-income families face when coming to Canada. As a mitigation strategy, I could maybe decide to devote a few weeks to researching on this topic, or I could also ensure that my evaluation team has diverse experiences of immigration. I have seen evaluators use positionality statements in different places and ways. Sometimes they will share them in a meeting. I've also seen them shared in conferences or other presentations. I recently contributed to a journal article about the role of artificial intelligence on the future of evaluation education, and one of the authors suggested that we write a positionality statement as a group. So we did, and it is actually at the beginning of the journal article. I have seen a lot of other published papers include positionality statements, especially in evaluation journals. So if you want to see some examples of these, evaluation journals are a great place to start. When thinking about the use of positionality statements in academic journals, I think they can also play an important role in acknowledging what voices are being included and which ones are being erased from the collective knowledge that we continue to use over generations. This can be very challenging to assess when you're reading a publication and just looking at authors' names and affiliations. I think in the future, as they're widely adopted, it could also reduce the occurrence of authors writing and researching about different groups without having their lived experience, which has sometimes resulted in negative consequences for those groups. So I wanted to go back to why I wanted to start this episode talking about positionality statements and sharing my positionality statement. And I think it's because one's experiences, privileges, and identities play a huge role when we're navigating our career and the labor market. My position in this world also influences my approach to evaluation, what I value in evaluation projects, and how I relate to people that I work with. Since I will be sharing about my experiences and about my opinions here, it is impossible for me to do that in an objective way, and it will be influenced by my experiences and my identities. So this positionality statement was a reflective exercise for me to help me navigate this work and this podcast in a more intentional way. I also want to acknowledge, before sharing my positionality statement, that your specific experiences, identities, and your position in the world will be quite different to mine, and that is completely okay. Career journeys are unique and they're non-linear. This is especially the case for a career like evaluation, because we don't have a lot of evaluation programs, and many of us came into this field in an accidental way. There is no one-size-fits-all for being and becoming an evaluator. So I encourage you, as you're hearing this podcast, and as you hear advice from others and what has worked in their careers, that you remember that your position is unique and that what worked for others might not necessarily work for you. So with that context, I'm going to share the aspects of my identity that I think are the most relevant to the topics that I will be sharing in this podcast. And I did take some time and intentionality to develop this, so I am going to read it just so I make sure that I don't miss anything. As an Ecuadorian immigrant to Canada, I've navigated the complexities of being a visible minority woman in the field of program evaluation. Despite a privileged upbringing and education, I've faced challenges in developing the competencies needed to be an evaluator and have experienced gender-based disparities in compensation. My feminist views, strengthened through involvement in gender-based violence work, fuel my interest in this woman-dominated yet often men-led field. As a young evaluator, I bring a unique perspective to my work. My experiences have made me passionate about supporting others in the evaluation careers, advocating for transparency, and ensuring safe, satisfying, and valued work environments. Despite the challenges that I have faced, I've built a rewarding career and hope to use my platform to help others do the same. I do want to share that I consider to be in a pretty privileged and safe space today when it comes to making career decisions. But this hasn't always been the case. Being in this position today makes it easier to be assertive, to ask for what I need, and to make career decisions from a leadership stance. Being in a work environment where I have the psychological safety to be who I am has also made a huge difference. I wanted to acknowledge this because I'm very aware that not everyone is in a similar place. I know that some people might be in unsafe work environments where speaking up might not be an option. I will do my best to bring this awareness and to reflect on the times in my life where I have been in a similar spot when I discuss the topics in this podcast. My main focus, though, is that despite the situation you're in today, you deserve a career where you are safe, satisfied, and valued. And if your present situation doesn't reflect this, my hope is that this podcast helps guide you towards a workplace or a career that does. I also wanted to share that during the most challenging times in my career, my mental health hit the lowest point that I've ever experienced. I don't treat these challenges and the impact that they can have on our well-being lightly. During this time, I relied very heavily on my social networks, and really mainly my partner, who I think deserves a statue for all his support and patience during this time. But eventually I realized that I needed professional help. So I found a counselor, and I was lucky to find a career registered counselor. I didn't even know that this existed before this point in my life. There is no way I can express the role that accessing this service played in my life. I am a huge proponent of taking care of our mental health. So I just wanted to suggest that if you are in a place where you do not feel safe, or if you're facing a difficult time in your career or in your personal life, that you consider reaching out to your support network or a professional service, because it can really make a difference. So with that said, I would like to start wrapping up my first episode with 3 tips about positionality statements that might help you integrate them in your career or know how to use them. The first one is that you can use positionality statements as a way to strengthen and practice your reflexivity competencies. If you're working, for example, towards your credentialed evaluator designation with the Canadian Evaluation Society, you can definitely include in your narrative how you use positionality statements in your work. The second tip is that you keep in mind that positionality statements are not for everyone and that you don't have to use one. Before deciding whether you should or shouldn't use one, I think a very important question to consider and to reflect on is how you approach and what you think about evaluation. If you think evaluation should be objective and there's an objective truth, and that evaluators should always show up in this way, then a positionality statement that acknowledges and identifies our potential biases might not be fully aligned with that thinking. And the third tip is that if you do decide to adopt a positionality statement and to use it in your work, that you approach developing one with intentionality and with honesty. If you have never developed one, there's many resources online to help you work through one. And you can also ask Copilot or ChatGPT, whatever you use, to give you some brainstorming questions that can help you reflect on what identities might be relevant to including your positionality statement. So I hope that those 3 tips were useful, and I hope that you learned about positionality statements in this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again next time.